I'm Aaron Weintraub, and this is Inside Kurdistan. In the previous episode of Inside Kurdistan, I spoke with Colonel Miles Kaggans about his work with Operation Inherent Resolve, or OIR, the multinational coalition created in 2014 in the interest of defeating ISIS. And in that interview, he referenced one person in particular who he deemed as inherently necessary for his success working there, and that person was Tanya Aziz. Tanya Aziz is the senior advisor to the director of the coalition. Specifically, she essentially acts as the lead cultural consultant for the commanding general of the operation. She brings international and local communities together. And I wanted to speak with Tanya about her own perspective of the coalition and conflict in Iraq in general. I think a lot of the time when countries like the United States or EU countries send forces abroad, we tend to forget that those troops rely on local assistance, and those local authorities experience loss and sacrifice to the same, if not at times a greater degree in conflicts like the ones against ISIS. And it's easy to forget if you're in a country like the United States that local forces have to deal with the consequences of conflict long after other countries have pulled out. I spoke with Tanya about the loss of her friend and colleague, Husham al Hashimi, who was a specialist and historian working with OIR to defeat ISIS, and he was assassinated in 2020. And we discussed how perhaps foreign and local troops process loss differently in conflict zones. I also spoke with her about the current status of the coalition and how things have changed in recent years and what she still feels needs to be done with Operation Inherent Resolve. A quick note, I think you should definitely listen to the episode before this one, as the interviews between Tanya and Miles are very closely linked, and we begin with discussing their work together in this episode. But with all that said, here's Tanya Aziz. Tanya Aziz, thanks so much for joining me.
Of course, anytime, Aaron. It was very nice to visually meeting you.
Yes, I'm sorry we didn't get to meet in person. Are you in Suli or Baghdad right now?
I'm in Baghdad.
Okay. I wanted to actually start with your own personal connection with Miles. I was curious because he brought you up in our interview that I had with him last week. I was curious how you became acquainted with him and sort of the nature of your working relationship.
I'm the senior advisor to the commanding general of OIR. And Miles, at the time in 2019 to 20, he was the OIR spokesperson. It is part of my job to advise spokesmen and spokesperson and all entire public affairs office and information operations on, OIR operations. And for a couple of months, I did not really get close to him because I was busy with my own job and traveling with the commanding general. But then I realized we needed more to come out more publicly. And the spokesperson, I kind of realized Miles he wanted to reach out to people. He loved to learn. He loved the culture. He was so excited for being here in Iraq. And one day I just walked up to him and I said, we need to do something. We need to get you out. We need to introduce you to different people, not only here in Baghdad, but also outside of Baghdad and in Syria as well, with the Syrian Democratic Forces. And Miles loved the idea and he was open for it. So all what I did really with Miles was introducing Miles to different people in Erbil, in Suli, in Syria. We traveled several times. So from there, we hold press conferences. Every day he got to see or know someone new, even when I wasn't there. So his personality, it was the reason for the friendship I have with Miles and him becoming a star. He's a star himself, but he became a star. Like everyone knew Miles. It was great. It was awesome to see him grow. It was awesome to see him learning more every day, speaking to different people from Erbil, from Sulaymaniyah, from Hasaka, not only locally, but also regionally and internationally. So that was a great year for OIR's Public Affairs Office.
Can you talk to me about not just your own background, but sort of your own interest with being able to connect local and international communities together through this work with the coalition?
It's part of my job, making sure the OIR is connected to different entities, different groups, different political parties, and getting everyone informed. And to keep the world informed of what OIR is doing as far as the mission to defeat Daesh. And so it is part of it, making sure the command is informed also of everything that is happening locally, regionally, and internationally.
And last week, I spoke with Miles about sort of the importance of coming as an American to a foreign country and integrating yourself with the culture and how that's important for the future of American defense policy. And I'm curious from your perspective as sort of a person who has to go between both local and international communities. From the local community's perspective, what is important? What do local communities bring to a coalition like this?
Local community, of course, they do. I mean, they have a big role in supporting coalition forces in both in Iraq and Syria. Local community can provide a lot. Local community can also benefit from the presence of the coalition forces. The stability that brought to the region, it was not only, yes, it's true, it was not only done by the coalition forces, but also support from the local community that provided to the coalition forces, whether it was by providing armed men to fight for their own land, or providing any sort of assistance to the coalition to defeat terrorism or to eliminate terrorism in their area. I think not often we do speak about the role of the local community, but they also assisted in bringing the culture closer together, teaching each other simple things and daily life, how people actually live, and learning from each other. An Eastern and Middle Eastern guy from locally born and raised learned from a Western guy that works maybe close to him, or may not even work close by, but they do learn from each other, whether they hear it from the media or social media or all these different outlets that is available to people.
One thing that I've actually been very interested in is a big topic about soldiers, American soldiers going abroad and then coming back is the issues that they have with trauma and PTSD specifically. And I'm curious, in your view, how does PTSD affect soldiers coming to another country that then return versus local forces that stay in the area after the fighting is finished or has dissipated?
I am not expert in that area. I can't really speak about diagnosing soldiers with the PTSD or any other illnesses. However, from my own background and researches and basically experience working in this field and being overseas outside of the United States, I think I'm originally from the area, and we brought up in an environment where we were exposed to different lifestyle. We lived our childhood in a war, for example. Mm-hmm. For a certain time, it became a norm to see, fighting, to hear of all these tragedies that happened when before us and after us. And I do think, I'm not speaking, like I said, as an expert here, but just a personal experience for any Westerner when they come to Middle East, in especially in a combat zone. I think even being a soldier, sometimes seeing certain scene in operations will be effective. Obviously, the fight in Iraq, it was not easy from the very beginning. I won't say in 2003, but from 2004, April 2004 and beyond, it was not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely do affect young soldiers even more. But like I said, I can't really speak of the illnesses and diagnosis
No,
of these soldiers.
of course, I understand. For me
Yeah.
personally, like my early childhood memory of of the United, well, I guess there's the Bush Gore elections, but then after that it's 9/11, and I was in first
Yeah.
grade. I remember the principal wrote a letter to the parents. I guess I was 6 years old. And I remember watching the footage on TV later that evening, but I feel like the memory wasn't necessarily traumatic for me. It just kind of ended up
Mhm.
coloring everything that happened afterwards in America. And yeah, I understand where you're coming from with America has a different relationship with these kinds of things. For example, as an example of like quote unquote Western country.
Yeah, but you have to keep in mind, like being a soldier in combat, when things happen, sometimes speaking about certain incidents, it's easy, but to actually live in it, it's not.
Absolutely. Well, and I think grief processes differently. I think there's a certain understanding with soldiers coming from a different country for a coalition like this that you know, God willing, you return. You do leave this area eventually, but some people stay.
Mhm.
So grief is different. For example, I actually wanted to bring up a colleague of yours, Husham al Hashimi, and I was wondering if you could tell me about him as an example of someone from here that you I know grieved for.
Um, Unfortunately, yes, and Hisham's memorial actually coming up. Um, a dear friend, a very close friend. He was he was my mentor. He was someone I looked up to. He was not only actually my mentor or a friend of mine, but also to many others. Hisham touched literally everyone in his life that one day heard from him, saw him, talked to him, or sat down with him for a cup of coffee. Losing Hisham, it was terrible. We were supposed to meet that day actually, but he got a call for an interview. So that very same day he was assassinated. We spoke around 4 p.m. literally about this time, and by 7, before I even call him, because I was waiting for the interview to come up so we can talk and then maybe set up to see each other another day or so he can visit. And all of a sudden I get the message from Miles. I was like, no, what are you talking about? And so I tried to call him and call him and call him, no response. But later on, sometime when I see the video and I see the phone lighting up, in the vehicle, I feel like maybe those were my call going through when Hisham was assassinated in his car. Grieving, the stages of grief is different from one person to another, but they definitely leave an empty spots in your heart. Will remain in your heart and mind always. Um, and that was a big loss, not just for me as a friend, but obviously first for his family and kids, and for many, many other friends like myself.
Do you think there are cultural differences in that kind of grief during conflict?
I think the way we express it, maybe it's different.
Mm-hmm.
The way we show it is different. But grief is a grief. We may not be exposed to the way people hold funeral here versus in the West, but emotions, I think it's the same. It's just culture differences is there definitely, but I don't think anyone can actually forget about, a loved one when they lose. So it's just a matter of how we show it and how we express it and what we are doing during the funeral.
And I think that's part of the idea almost of the coalition, is that we do have a shared experience. We do, at the end of the day, have a united interest in creating a healthy human experience for like every different kind of culture, regardless of where you are. And I would say, I think there's a lot of people who would look at the coalition as it stands now and says, oh, ISIS is taken care of, it's handled. These are people, maybe in America who aren't familiar with how things are here necessarily. But what would you say to that kind of critique of the coalition now and its sort of status?
Unfortunately, I'm not. I think from to think and to see it outside the box. When I look at media outlets, when I read newspaper, or when I speak to people, not many people aware of what really happening or the existence of ISIS, the existence of terrorism and extremist ideology that still exists, not only locally but also regionally.
Mm-hmm.
So a unified force, not combat force, I mean, a unified force, it requires a unified force to notify the populations. People more worry about providing for their family than terrorism. To think about it from one point of view, it's unfortunate because both of them are dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
To only think about what you provide to the family versus having a terrorist right outside your door, both are dangerous. So it's on the local government to educate the people on terrorism, to educate the people on what really happening, because that still exists. Extremist ideology, it does exist, and those are counter the extremist ideology and counter-terrorism will continue for some time, I believe.
And how has the OIR's role changed since 2014 to 2019 to 2022? Can you give me some insight on that? What has shifted in terms of the goals?
No, OIR, during the operations to defeat Daesh from 2014-15 till 2020, things were operational, no changes. However, from training and from operational level and in training, OIR changed its mission. Still, the mission remained defeat Daesh, but now we are, from 2020 until now, we are giving advice and assist and enabling our local partners. And the changes, these changes happen because the Iraqi security forces and Peshmerga forces are now capable of conducting operations on their own. However, we do provide air supports, we provide intelligence, we also assist and enable them to conduct operations.
And what would you like to see moving forward with OIR in terms of what kind of things do you think still need to be accomplished with its goals?
I think, I don't know, I can't say how long OIR will be around, but what I like to see and what everyone in the CGTF OIR will like to see in the future is a unified force, a fully capable security force that can stop any threats, ISIS or no ISIS or any other different extremist group or non-extremist group that create hostile environment and instability in the area. A reform within the security forces is essential. by all means, whether we are speaking about Iraqi security forces or Peshmerga security forces. So those are the things that we like to see in CJTF.
And to circle back, as you mentioned, in recent years, the coalition has focused more on sort of empowering local forces. Would you say, as a sort of a go-between between the international community and the local forces, both culturally and with the coalition, we don't necessarily need as much international emphasis on these goals? Or do you think that perhaps maybe the coalition has emphasized too much with local authority?
I think they do require, international assistance when it comes to security forces and the reform. These are all areas the local government required assistance with. Both here in with the central government and in Kurdistan regional government as well. That being said, I think one area the coalition is in assistance. It's, for example, Ministry of Peshmerga Affairs with their reform projects. Coalition has been working with the Ministry of Peshmerga for years on the reform project. Luckily, some of the projects have been implemented as successful, and some unifications we can see, but it's still incomplete and require more agreements, required more work, organizational structure. All that also apply on the Iraqi security forces. So they do definitely require assistance, may not be available. They may have a manpower, but the structure is not there. And the world has changed. The way different institutions operate around the world have changed. So you have to be more mobilized, more capable, not just with military capability, but also with the manpower, and institutionalizing your security forces.
What do you mean by institutionalizing your security forces?
Well, we do a lot of different entities, security entities are there. We hear different names, but they not necessarily have an organizational scale structure. So unifications and reorganizations and reform projects, those can be utilized to institutionalize all these different sectors with the correct structure.
Well, Tanya Aziz, I really appreciate you giving me your time today, even if it's over the phone from Baghdad.
You kind of breaking in and out, but you are very welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Have a wonderful day.
You too. I'd like to thank Tanya Aziz for taking the time to talk with me. And of course, I'd like to thank our listeners for giving her your time as well. Inside Kurdistan is brought to you by the Kurdistan Information Network. You can listen to other episodes on our website. There's a link in the description. If you'd like to subscribe to our podcast, you can hit the button at the top of the page on any podcast app that you download, Apple, Spotify, etc. And of course, if you'd like to reach out to us for comments or questions about any of our episodes, you can reach out to us at info@kurdistanin.net, and that is included in the description below as well. Thanks once again. I've been Aaron Weintraub, and this has been Inside Kurdistan.